Good morning and Assalamu alaikum, my dears. I hope you all are doing well. So, welcome to yet another session of A05 Signatures Expressing the Self. I hope you remember what we did in the last class. Yes, we had introduced the poet Nellie Wong, and I had given you a fairly good concept, and I shared my thought about racism. So now, moving on, before getting directly into the poem, or before starting with the paraphrase of the poem When I Was Growing Up, let me tell you a few important points to be noted about the poem. It is an autobiographical poem by the writer Nellie Wong. It was published in the year 1973. It emphasizes the identity crisis that was experienced by the Asian Americans, specifically the Chinese immigrants in America. It is mainly composed in the past tense, and there are many basic features about the poem which makes it stand out. Like many of the stanzas are intended, and there is very little use of capitalization. Rhetorical questions, imagery, and repetitions are another feature of the poem. The poem tells us how the narrator, Nellie Wong, was forced to accept the dominant white culture and disown her own ethnic Chinese culture for the fear of being discriminated. She shows her struggles of growing up as a young lady. She tells us that for her, beauty was coded as white in her childhood. The poem is a poem of transition and realization, her attaining self-identity and accepting her ethnic identity. It examines contemporary mainstream views of beauty and sexuality and the speaker's desire to conform to those standards. Conform here means to go along with those standards. Some of the major themes that are explored are exoticism, orientalism, sexuality, confession, and escapism. The poem uses a very conversational tone, and the reader feels very much comfortable. The speaker describes her desperation in a society that celebrates white beauty. She feels that beauty is coded as fairness. The speaker narrates how she was trying to adapt to the Western language and culture, and how she had struggled. Well, adapting into a language is easy, but adapting into a culture is quite a different thing. The poem ends with a note of self-realization about identity, thereby dismantling the stereotype of the Western beauty cult. So by the end of the poem, we find that the poet Nellie Wong, what can we say? She accepts herself. She accepts herself as a Chinese American. And she is dismantling the stereotype, meaning dismantling. The word means mantle is something like a cover, as an outer covering. So dismantling is removing that outer cover. So she is removing that stereotype, that typecast of the Western beauty cult. Now moving on to the poem When I Was Growing Up by Nellie Wong. I know now that once I longed to be white. How, you ask? Let me tell you the ways. When I was growing up, people told me I was dark, and I believed my own darkness in the mirror, in my soul, my own narrow vision. When I was growing up, my sisters with fair skin got praised for their beauty, and I fell further, crushed between high walls. When I was growing up, I read magazines and saw movies, blonde movie stars, white skin, sensuous lips, and to be elevated to become a woman, a desirable woman, I began to wear imaginary pale skin. So, this is a fairly easy section. So, let us paraphrase this poem, these lines. I know now that once I longed to be white. So here we find the poet Nellie Wong speaking of a time when she felt that her fairness was not enough and how she longed to be white. So you have to focus on the word once here. I know now. That is, she has a realization and she is writing the poem. So when she writes the poem, she has already attained the self-realization and the transition has already occurred. So she's saying, I know now I realize that once I longed to be white. So she's speaking of a past tense or of a long time back situation, a scenario when she longed to be white. How, you ask? So how would you long to be white? So what are the ways? Let me tell you the ways. When I was growing up, people told me I was dark. She was dark in the sense, if you think of the Chinese, the Japanese, the Korean, the Orientals. Orientals mean the people from the West. They are dark compared to the Westerners in the sense they had a yellowish skin. So we have different cultures representing different colors. So if the Western culture or the Westerners are always said to be white, the Indians are said to be brown, the Africans are black, then the Chinese, the Japanese, the Korean, the Oriental, so to speak, they are said to be yellow, since their skin tone is a bit of a yellowish tint. So she was told by people when she was growing up that she was dark in the sense she was not the fair, the Western concept of fair. And she believed her own darkness. When she looked in the mirror, she saw how she was different. So you have to think of this concept. She was growing up in America. She is being born and brought up there. She is the daughter of Chinese immigrants. That is, her parents had come and settled in America. So she is born in America. She is as much American as anyone else. But still, because of her skin color, she is being differentiated or she is being discriminated. So when she looked in the mirror, she saw this difference in the skin tone. She could see the difference in her soul, in her own narrow vision. And when I was growing up, my sisters with fair skin got praised. Here, it might not mean her own sisters, but people of her own, what can we say, her own peer group, how they were fairer than her and they were praised for their beauty. So beauty was coded white. And she again felt very crushed between high walls. That is, she felt very suffocated. So this is what happens when you are discriminated. And then she read magazines, she sees movies, she's seeing all these Western American movies, a kind of a culture. She's growing up in that culture. She is seeing their movies and, their concepts. So she's seeing these blonde movie stars. If you look at the Chinese, the Japanese, they all have dark hair, almost, jet black hair. And their eyes are very small, very thin, lips also very thin. They don't have, large lips. They are fairly very short, right? So when she sees these images in the magazines and movies, she's seeing blonde movie stars, white skin, sensuous lips meaning very full, very beautiful lips. And to be elevated, that is, to be elevated meaning to raise high. Elevate meaning to raise high. To become a woman, a desirable woman, what she do? That is, to become like them, she began to wear an imaginary pale skin. Imaginary pale skin here refers to, using lots of makeup. So moving on to the next lines. When I was growing up, I was proud of my English, my grammar, my spelling, fitting into the group of smart children, smart Chinese children, fitting in, belonging, getting in line. So in these lines, we find that Nellie Wong, when she was a very young student in school, she fitted in. That is, she tried to fit in because she was very smart. So she was very studious, and in that sense, she started fitting in among them because of her English, her grammar and spelling. So obviously, being brought up in America, she would have their grammar and spelling. So she became a smart girl and she tried to fit in. But later, when she grew up, when I was growing up and went to high school, I discovered the rich white girls, a few yellow girls. Their imported cotton dresses, their cashmere sweaters, curly hair, and I thought that I too should have what these lucky girls had. So who are the lucky girls according to Nellie Wong? The lucky girls are the rich white girls and a few yellow girls. So they were also rich. So she was seeing in high school. High school is a time, when you reach your teenage and, you have all these crushes. You start getting attracted to the opposite sex. And that is when you start paying more attention to your appearance, your dressing. So that is how she felt. They were very rich because they were lucky. They had curly hair, cotton dress and everything that was associated with it. When I was growing up, I hungered for American food, American styles, coded white. So everything American was coded white for her. And even to me, a child born of Chinese parents, being Chinese was feeling foreign, was limiting, was un-American. So for her, though born of Chinese parents and being grown up in a Chinese family, she was feeling very foreign in her own house. She was feeling very un-American. This is very interesting because my brother's family, they are settled in America, and their children, they tell me their experience because I have three my children have 3 cousins there in America. So there 2 of them are boys and 1 is a girl. And my brother tells me how they try to talk Malayalam in their house in America, and they are settled in California. So they try to imbibe into their children this Malayali culture and this beautiful they try to make them understand Malayalam as much as possible, but still going to school and living among children of their age and having friends who speak only English. So it's very difficult. So they find it very un-American. The kids, they find it very un-American, speaking in Malayalam. They understand Malayalam now, but they don't speak the language. So this is something very common. Okay, now, so moving on. When I was growing up and a white man wanted to take me out. Now after high school, she reaches a very adolescent age. She becomes, more matured, going out, having dates, people going out for dates and having a relationship. And when a white man wanted to take her out, she thought she was special. An exotic gardenia. Gardenia is a kind of an exotic flower, anxious to fit the stereotype of an oriental chick. So she knew that she was considered an oriental chick. Chick meaning a very beautiful girl, but of Oriental culture. So she could not rub that off. And when I was growing up, I felt ashamed of some yellow men. Yellow men is a kind of, derogatory term that is used for the Chinese or the Japanese. So she felt ashamed of men of her own ethnicity and their small bodies. How compared to the Westerners, they are small, they are, short people, and their frail bodies, spitting on the streets, coughing, lying in sunless rooms, shooting themselves in the arm. So this is, showing how addiction to drugs and all, shooting themselves in the arms, that kind of using, intoxications. So she's referring to the Western, how in the Western concept, the Chinese people were derogated. So she also started looking at them in that sense. She was not very pleased with how the yellow men or the Chinese men were portrayed in America. So she felt very ashamed of that. When I was growing up, people would ask if I were Filipino, Polynesian, Portuguese. They named all colors except white, the shell of my soul, but not my rough dark skin. So she's saying that as she was growing up, people would ask her ethnicity. It's difficult for us, to differentiate what kind of people they are. They all look the same to us, whether it's Chinese or Japanese. And for the Westerners, it's even difficult to understand whether they are Portuguese, Polynesian, Filipino. I think they also look somewhat similar to the Chinese. So people have difficulty understanding their ethnicity or their descents. They named all colors except white. So she felt very hurt that no one would ask her, "Are you American?" Because no one felt that she was American because of her, color, skin tone. She was clearly not American, anything but American. Got the point? So people would ask her all colors except white. So she was trying so hard to be white, putting all these imaginary pale skin, that is the her makeup. So she used all this makeup and tried to be as fair as she could, trying to fit into their culture. But still they would understand and they would ask what her ethnicity is. And she's saying that white is the color of her soul, the shell of my soul. That is, her soul is not American, but she has put a shell or covering to that soul that was white, but not my rough dark skin. When I was growing up, I felt dirty. She felt very dirty. She felt that she was not very clean, being not fair. I thought that God made white people clean, and no matter how much I bathed, I could not change. I could not shed my skin in the grey water. So she felt that God had made only the white people were clean, the black people were, not clean, or people other than white were not clean. And no, how much she bathed, she could not shed that skin color. It's a feeling we all have at a point in time, a point in our lives when we want to be fairer, and we think how unfair God is. God didn't give me the color. When I was growing up, I swore I would run away to purple mountains, houses by the sea with nothing over my head, with space to breathe, uncongested with yellow people, in an area called Chinatown, in an area I later learned was a ghetto, one of many hearts of Asia, America. So as she was growing up, she felt so much discriminated in life that she always wanted to run away from there. She wanted to escape being a part of America where she was being discriminated, and she wanted to escape to a house by the sea with nothing over her head. That is, she wanted to escape a city life, and she wanted to lead a very peaceful life somewhere with space to breathe and uncongested. That is it, where there were not much people, especially yellow people, and she did not want yellow people in that area. In an area called Chinatown. So she thought she could escape to a place called Chinatown. She felt it's a good place to go to, but later she learns that it's actually a ghetto, a kind of a slum area, and outside in China. It's outside the city, and it is considered one of the hearts of Asian America. Okay, there are lots of, it's actually a place outside China, and it's kind of a slum area, but there are many Chinese there. So she wanted to escape to Chinatown. I know now that once I longed to be white. How many more ways, you ask? Haven't I told you enough? So now she has that realization. She has reached that transition level. Transition meaning a change, a change in your outlook in life. So she has changed herself. So now she realizes that she once longed to be white. Again, that significance to once. Once, that is, now she does not have that longing. Now she does not desire to be white. And she's saying, how many more ways, you ask? So haven't I told you enough? Haven't I told you of many ways that I try to be white? And this is just some of the ways she has told us how she tried to be white, and she's asking the readers whether it's not enough. So this poem is a very beautiful poem and a very simple poem, which tells us how she yearned to be, tried to fit into the American culture. So she tried to be as much American as the Americans were, and in her house, being brought up in a Chinese house to Chinese parents, she was feeling foreign. So we can understand how much she had tried to fit in and how much she had become American, but still she could not be accepted into that culture or into that niche, into that setup of Americans. She was still an outsider. She was still considered an outsider there. So it's some beautiful concepts conveyed very fairly. It's an aspect of racism we find here. So I hope the poem was very clear. And it's a very simple poem, and since you have already read the poem and come for today's class, I hope that you were able to complement or to supplement to what you have already understood from your reading of the poem. So till we meet again in the next class, thank you for your time and keep smiling, girls.